Hi everyone. So I feel it's topical to say some things about this controversy around Omid Scobie and his book Endgame and the fallout from that, and also the fallout from Piers Morgan naming the two royals on Talk TV. I believe it was last night. Um, where to start with this? There's a lot to say. I want to get some names right, so I'll get those out of the way first. I've just watched a segment on Talk TV, and this was a follow up from Piers Morgan naming the two royals. I will name them in this video because it's in the public domain now. The two royals named is His Majesty the King and Catherine, Princess of Wales. It's Charles and Catherine. They are the two royals that have been named. I'll come back to that in a second. It's in the public domain, that's why I'm naming them here. Apparently, Piers Morgan took legal advice before doing that. But basically, he got into a very heated back and forth with Tessa Dunlop on Talk TV and also Paula Rowan Adrian. And Dickie Arbiter was also on the program. But it was the two women that were really basically laying into Piers. They really took issue with what he was saying. Tessa Dunlop, from what I could tell, was just ranting. She basically said, you know, better than Omid Scobie for naming them. Now, it's important to consider that when Morgan done this, he made it very clear that he doesn't believe they're racists. I don't, and that was he said he done it in the interest of transparency to stop this witch hunt, um, as he put it. I haven't watched the whole segment on that, but that was his justification. Tessa Dunlop basically described him as this isn't verbatim, but it was a lump of phlegm landing on the royal doorstep, as she put it, and she accused him of, another rant about Harry. Um, Paula, Paula Rowan Adrian. I'm not sure who she is. I don't know if she's a journalist or a writer, but her whole pitch was to basically weaponize race. You know, to talk about how Morgan is just making assumptions and how can he know these things. He's talking about Scobie making assumptions, but he's doing the same thing. And then she went in to lecture Morgan about, how can he know about someone's experience? But it's interesting because at the start of the segment, yesterday's segment, and I've just watched that part, not the whole thing, but that part, Morgan made a good point. He said, we live in an era where someone's truth is taken to be the truth. And, that point about racism, I'm so sick of a segment of the political left and woke ideologues and race baiters weaponizing race. Now, like I say, there's a lot of things to say around this, so bear with me, but I think it's very important because I think this is about constant snipes at the royal family. I think it is about um, basically this situation in the 21st century and how it's interpreted going forward because I think there's a lot of talking points around this. Nana Akua in the Daily Mail makes a very good point now. She is a black woman. Um, I'll just read out her piece in the Daily Mail because I think it's very important and it's a point that I've long considered with this whole controversy over. I mean, the whole racism thing stems from something that was supposedly said about Archie's skin color. Um, no one even knows what precise year this happened, but presumably when they were still in Britain. Um, so the late 2010s at some point. Anyway, this is the. I won't read out the whole thing, but this is what Nana Aqua says. At office water coolers, on social media, and in bars and cafes around the country, one question has dominated conversation. Everyone, she's got that in italics, wanted to know the identity of the supposed royal racists, she's put that in inverted commas, who allegedly asked about the skin colour of Harry and Meghan's yet to be born son, Archie, after they were inadvertently outed by the Sussex's apparent mouthpiece Omid Scobie in his new book Endgame. But everyone has been asking the wrong question. What people should be considering is whether it's racist at all to wonder out loud about the skin tone of an unborn baby. As the black mother of two mixed race children, I can tell you One of the few things my ex-partner and I agreed on before our son's birth was his name, Ivory. I would laugh with my friends and family. What if he comes out really dark? The very opposite of what his name suggests. We'd have loved him the same no matter how he looked. We were just curious. Now, the whole time with this whole race controversy, that was my interpretation. I think it's completely normal for expectant parents to muse on what their child might look like. In this case, apparently it wasn't them, it was other family members, named now as the King and the Princess of Wales. But what I think is utterly grotesque, is how people can sort of distort this innocent family conversation into some sort of sinister white supremacist thing. It's grotesque. And I think Morgan made the point it belittles actual racism. Um, there's that famous picture of the late Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh and Meghan Markle's mother. You know, I don't think that's for the cameras. Obviously, it's photographed, but I think that's a sincerely warm family picture. And I cannot believe that there is a racist bone in the King or Catherine's body. I just don't. My gut feeling is that is complete nonsense. But it all comes down to the supposed question about the baby's skin tone. Now, that's very important because the whole basis of this royal racist thing is that there's actual racism. And I have to say that anyone who interprets that as racist, it's it's sad. We're not talking here about some sort of white supremacist statement or some sort of comment of hate or, where the mixed race baby won't be welcome in our family. Nothing of the sort. I think that's a very important point that's being overshadowed by all this naming business. Apparently, the palace is considering legal action now. The book itself, Endgame, is a source of huge controversy. The Dutch publishers, apparently it's a small publishing house as opposed to the British and American publishers, which is HarperCollins, they have denied there was a mistranslation. And actually, there were extra paragraphs suggesting that what may have actually happened is that they translated it accurately. What actually happened was whether Scobie himself or someone else from his team then, issued this emergency guidance. Oh, don't publish it now because we've had legal advice not to. That seems to be what happened because they've come out on the defensive and said, no, we have not mistranslated this. It's word for word the transcript that we got. So not only is Scobie making some very spurious claims about the royal family, he is now slandering the Dutch publishing house. Um, this guy really doesn't come across well. For one thing, he's lied about his age. He's actually 42 now. At the time, he was 38. He claimed to be younger. Now, that may seem innocent enough, and he looks much younger than he is. I honestly assumed the guy was in his mid 20s. He's older than me. He's 42. That's, by the by. But the point is, it comes down to someone's credibility. Um, he claims he's not friends with Meghan, but there's a pressing question. How is it that he gets information about a private letter supposedly between Meghan and the King? She sent this. He was then Prince of Wales. She sent this after the fact, after that supposed conversation, to issue her concerns. Now, how does Scobie get his hands on that if it didn't come from Meghan herself or someone in her circle? That is, that's supposed to be a private letter. That is highly, highly dubious. It may be that Meghan and Harry didn't exactly give him the green light for this book, but there's another question. Harry in an interview with Tom Brady earlier this year, denied that either he or Meghan called anyone in the royal family racist, and they claim it was just concerns about unconscious bias. But for the last, what is it, 2 years since that interview, there's been all this rumour mills on both sides of the Atlantic about the supposed royal racist. Now, if Prince Harry had integrity, he would be speaking up and saying, no, my family are not racist. We have disagreements, but they're not racist. Why has he failed to do that? in over 2 years. And the most he can come out with is, "Oh, we didn't say that. It's a terrible press distorting everything." I think the real problem here is, well, actually about the Talk TV thing. It got into very heated riot. I'm going to put a link to that because it makes for some interesting viewing. I will say this, in regards to Morgan, naming them. Yes or no? I suppose there is an argument to be made that if the Dutch public can see this, why shouldn't the British public? And I suppose there is some truth in if you. It's a bit like naming someone to prevent the rumor mills churning against other people. But nevertheless, Morgan must know. It doesn't matter if he says like, "Oh, I don't believe they're racist." He's named them, right? It's out there. Um, and now I have as well. But that's what's happened. It's an incredible. I don't think there's anything more damaging to someone's public reputation than the charge of racism. Maybe sex crime is the only thing that sort of competes with that in terms of damaging someone's reputation. But as far as I'm concerned, the king, the queen, and the prince and princess of Wales have shown nothing but integrity and class in their public life, and I'm sick and tired of these snipes at them. Of course, they're not perfect; they're human beings, but contrast it with the Sussexes, who have had an absolute grievance industry going on since they decided to go to America. Just nothing but complaints, nothing but this victimhood complex. And Paula Rowan Adrian was talking about Meghan Markle's mental health. Well, what about the mental health of being publicly slandered? What about the mental health of members of the royal family when the Sussexes go on to Oprah Winfrey and just attack them in front of the world? And yes, there was other issues came up in that about the press and so on. I've been very critical of the paparazzi, but you know what? William and Catherine have also had problems with the paparazzi. Once again, the Sussexes think that they alone are victims, and I think this is what is so toxic about them. I think Markle is a very unlikable character. Why? Because to a lot of people, this is a woman who is absolutely has a massive chip on her shoulder. She is constantly pushing this poor me versus the world narrative. And yet she thinks she's in a position to lecture other people. For example, on her podcast a while back, she was talking about white men and Asian women, and interpretations of what that is. What the hell gives her a right to lecture other people on issues like that? She's entitled to her opinions, like anyone is. But I think what's so galling about the Sussexes is they just won't give it a rest. It's just interviews, books, podcasts. They claim they've got nothing to do with this. I don't believe that. I find it hard to believe that he's been widely described as their mouthpiece. Um, I do not believe that this book would have went ahead without Meghan and Harry knowing something. Maybe they didn't outright say, go ahead and publish it and we give you our blessing. But at the very least, their office could have said, we don't think it's a good idea at this point. But we don't want any more drama. We don't want any more of this constant transatlantic feud with our family. And you know what? Amidst all of this, apparently the king won't even consider the idea of stripping their titles now. That's an interesting thing, actually, because it may actually be the king is ignoring public opinion, because right now Harry and Meghan are deeply unpopular in this country, with good reason. So actually, the king, through integrity, through not wanting to humiliate his son and daughter-in-law, actually, ironically, that could actually damage him, because the public might say, actually, Your Majesty, we don't want them to enjoy all the royal privileges, such as security detail that they're demanding and the titles, and yet they take it all for granted, and they do. They absolutely take it for granted. These two have a very privileged life. They're rich, they're famous. Um, I'm not saying things are perfect. They have had problems with the paparazzi, but again, so has William and Catherine. So has every member of the royal family. Um, but I think the contrast with, for example, the Prince and Princess of Wales and Harry and Meghan, and I'm not saying William and Catherine are perfect. I happen to respect them a lot, but I'm sure there's been times when William has probably said things he regrets. So what? So what? Brothers argue, sisters argue, siblings argue. But this constant sniping away at the royal family, the notion, apparently this came out in the book as well, that William, the Prince of Wales, feeds briefings to the press about his brother. I do not believe that. I just don't believe it. Even if it were true, even if it was some sort of cynical thing by William, and if it is true, it would be despicable. I don't believe it. Because even if that were true, William must know that would backfire on him. Because then, it would just drag him into the media circus. When the last thing they want is this to rumble on. What they want is, focus on the work they're doing, for example, on Earthshot. In the case of the King, it was the COP28 summit in Dubai. That should have been the news. It's something that is very close to his heart. It's something, apparently, he was the only foreign head of state invited. There were heads of government, but he was the only foreign head of state. I'm not sure if that's accurate. Daily Mail said that. But apparently, on arrival, he was asked how he was. He was greeting President Tinubu of Nigeria, Tinubu, I should say. And he says, I'm all right. Let me just quote this exactly. Bear with me a second. There's a lot of different articles on this. Yeah, fine. Where was it? Yeah. Regardless, the king in diplomatic style, he didn't wade into that, but that should have been the news. I mean, this is something that some people will say it's all hot air, and actually, the king, Rishi Sunak, and David Cameron travelled on private jets, which will, lead to charges of hypocrisy. But regardless. I'm sure the royal family are sick of this. And what I find so contemptible is Harry and Meghan treat this whole thing like a media circus. They ran to Oprah Winfrey. Harry had his book Spare, and it's all about me, me, me. They know, they know that the king is not going to sit down and do rival interviews. Neither is William and Catherine, because frankly, they've got more class, they've got more integrity. I'm sure there's issues in the royal family that are not perfect. I'm sure there were times that maybe Harry and Meghan felt that, they were treated unfairly. But frankly, there may well be times that William and Catherine felt they were treated unfairly by the Sussexes. And I still think it is utterly grotesque and just crude to trash your family in front of the world the way they did in the Oprah interview. Now, again, that interview covered other things, but they done it. They done it. And it's just woke crap about unconscious bias and microaggressions, and it's just so toxic. Why? Because it feeds into false parallels with actual racism. I remember when the Prince of Wales was asked, is your family racist? And he said, no, absolutely not. Then he went about his business. Um, Now, Omid Scobie, I don't trust the guy. But it's not my position that the royal family cannot be criticised. And I recall in the 1950s, there was actually a Tory backbench peer, and also he ran a small newspaper. He was Lord Altrincham, John Grigg, and he was involved in a famous, if you want to call it scandal, a famous episode, let's say, in which he accused the then young Queen of acting like a smarmy schoolgirl. Well, he was absolutely vilified in the British press at the time. The mainstream press totally denounced him. The Crown had an episode about this. He was assaulted physically by a right wing so called member of I think it was the imperialist. I forget the precise name, but anyway, the guy was assaulted. So is there any parallels between Omid Scobie and them and excuse me, Lord Grigg? I don't think so. Lord Grigg was taking a real risk, and there was a good degree of controversy, but actually a lot of the British public agreed with him at the time. It was kind of the establishment that had a problem with it. And in contrast, I think, to Scobie, Lord Grigg was performing a genuine public service. There was things that needed to change in the royal family at the time, debutantes balls and not accepting divorcees and things like that. This is 70 years ago we're talking. Um, I think the contrast with Lord Grigg and Omid Scobie is Omid Scobie really is an opportunist. I think he really is someone who is getting his 15 minutes of fame. The book will no doubt be a bestseller because controversy sells. Um, but for him to say that him and Markle are not friends, I mean, they may not be best friends, but it's pretty obvious that he is close to the Sussexes. And it's his constant snipes. And, for him to have the arrogance to think he could lecture the royal family on what they must do to change. I mean, as it stands in this country, there is still a majority support for the monarchy. It's overwhelming, but it hovers between 60 and 75%. It's still a majority. Um, the king may not reach the heights of popularity that his mother did, but he still has majority support, and with good reason. Um, and one of the most difficult things for a monarch is basically the family situation. In the end of the day, the king is a head of state. He's the head of the Commonwealth, but he's also the patriarch of the family as it stands. And when that family is having, these constant tensions, it must be very, very difficult for the king, for the queen. I mean, she's been vilified. Camilla's been, basically branded the wicked stepmother by Harry. Um, I just think it is so unfair that the Sussexes think they can keep chipping away and keep, you know, attacking their own family this way, and then when the tables turn on them, they play the victim. Again, it may well be that things haven't been perfect. It may well be that members of the royal family could have approached things in a different way. But my point is that should be a private matter. What I think, where I lost all sympathy with Harry and Meghan, is when they decided to do that Oprah interview. I think it was crude. I think it was classless. I think it was cruel towards the royal family to just snipe away at them, knowing they couldn't defend themselves. I mean, does Harry and Meghan really think that they're going to sit down and do rival interviews to defend themselves? Harry especially knows that isn't the way it works. Now, Meghan, being an American and more used to that sort of culture where it's very much a big part of American culture. I think this sort of like sensational type interviews. We have it to some extent in the UK, but I do think there's a cultural thing there. I also resent her constantly talking about herself as a woman of colour. I mean, she's mixed race. That's what Meghan Markle is. But this constant victimhood narrative, there's people who really struggle out there. She's a very privileged woman. She's wealthy, she's famous, and I'm sick and tired of this victimhood complex that they're constantly pushing. They spoke about going to America for, to step back from public duties. Well, they've made damn sure that they're in the public eye ever since. And I think on both sides of the Atlantic now, there is widespread distrust in them. Initially, especially after the Oprah interview, there were a lot of Americans naively just lapping up, oh, the royal family are racist. Um, Americans aren't very good at due process, about the notion of due process, and this crap about their truth must be the truth. It strikes me as incredibly damaging. I mean, do the royal family not have any assumption of innocence? But again, this whole thing about the racism, um, what it ultimately comes down to is the king and the Princess of Wales innocently raising what would the baby look like? I mean, the notion that this is some sort of sinister, racist intention, it's just, and like I say, Harry can say he never said the word racist. But the fact of the matter is, in that interview, the Oprah interview, they spoke about unconscious bias. And for 2 years, the Sussexes allowed, the rumour mills on both sides of the Atlantic to just talk about the royal racists. They didn't do a damn thing. Harry didn't sort of say, no, no, I never said that at the time. It took him 2 years to this year with the interview with Tom Brady to sort of rein back on it. Um, I'm sick of the Sussexes, quite frankly. I'm sick of their self pity. I'm sick of their narcissism. And this constant focus on mental health, well, a lot of people have had mental health problems. Other public figures have had mental health problems. The date Rosalind Carter dedicated her public life to addressing that issue. Um, Harry's done some good things. I give him credit for, the creation of the Invictus Games. That's wonderful. I give him credit. I play fair. I give credit where credit's due. But I think over the last 4 years, his antics have just reeked of self pity. Another issue is, he's now found himself as this crusader for anti-racism. Well, as a young man, he made foolish comments, dressing in Nazi uniform. Now, that could be forgiven as youthful foolishness, but I think the public don't think highly of hypocrites. That is, people. It's sort of like Nana Akua also made the point. It's a bit like ex-smokers who lecture everyone about the dangers of smoking. It doesn't go down well with the public. And they can say they've got nothing to do with the Scobie book. Well, if that's true, they can denounce it and, say that we don't approve of this attack on the royal family. But will they do that? No. I mean, Scobie, that expression, all publicity is good publicity, whether it's bad or not. Right now, it's, his credibility is not going down well. Sadly, there will be people who just blindly believe it because they very much take this woke ideology of my truth is the truth. So they'll just blindly believe everything that Scobie says, just like they blindly believe everything that came out of the Oprah interview or everything that comes out of Spare. You know, it's this constant sniping away at the royal family that I'm sick of. It's not a case of saying they're above criticism. It's a case of the constant just sniping away. And also weaponizing race. I think that is utterly despicable. Um, and I think the majority are fed up with it. Also, there's real world problems. The COP28 summit, whatever you think of issues around climate change, I would say that's significantly more important than what Omid Scobie is doing with his grubby book. And I do think it's grubby. I think it's incredibly biased. And I think it's got an agenda. I've always supported investigative journalism, but investigative journalism should be objective and it should be looking at facts. A lot of the things he alleges he can't back up, and he's already been caught out. The Dutch publisher, and why would they lie about this? Why, if they'd made a mistake, why would they be now saying that that wasn't the case? It just reeks of a credibility issue with Mr. Scobie. And once again, the Sussex's grievance industry, I think people are wholly fed up with it. But those race baiters who say, you can't talk about this, you haven't experienced the trials of a woman of colour. Well, get the violin out. Meghan Markle is not a victim. Spare me. No pun intended. People are fed up of the Sussex's grievance industry. And this book is just yet another extension of it. I mean, maybe they didn't directly give the green light, but they've done next to nothing to sort of denounce it or say we're not interested in this. We want to move on. Um, but the fact that the king will not strip their titles, it's a paradox because on one hand that shows his decency, despite all the sniping away at him and members of his family, he won't do that. He doesn't want to humiliate them in contrast to what they've done to his family, their family, I should say. And yet, ironically, the public may demand that because why should they enjoy royal privileges? So this puts the king in a very difficult position because whatever he does, he's damned. If he strips her titles, then the Sussex supporters will say, "Oh, what a callous father! He's publicly humiliating them." And if he doesn't, the British public will say, why should they continue to enjoy royal privileges? So I think it puts the king in a difficult position. Um, that's my take. I'm sure there's many other things to say about this, but I personally am really, really tired of the Sussex grievance industry. There are real problems in this world, and they got what they wanted. They went to America. They still complain. They never stop complaining. And it isn't just the complaining, it's the fact that they think they can lecture other people. Meghan Markle, especially, what the hell gives her a right to lecture white men and Asian women on, I think she described it as fetishes, and, this exoticization of Asian women. It's just, I mean, she is an absolute woke warrior. There's no question about it. That's beside the point. Um, I think, I'll say one last thing. This distortion of reality, this notion that Meghan was treated in a cold way from the start. I remember 2018. Everyone in Britain pretty much welcomed Meghan Markle. You know, it was a royal wedding. Even the tabloids, you know, which can be cruel, they were all welcoming. They were talking about the beautiful bride. You know, it was all positive. Not good enough for her. You know, she apparently wanted to be paid, and I say apparently because again, this is one of many things that have come out and may or may not be true, but I could believe it, frankly. She apparently acted with surprise that she wouldn't be paid for royal engagements, and it's that sort of narcissistic me attitude. Whereas traditionally, members of the royal family would see it as duty. I mean, maybe I'm biased. I happen to like the king. I happen to like William and Catherine. Um, But I'm not saying they're perfect. I'm just saying that this constant sniping away, and you know, the fact that the King and Princess of Wales have been named, actually, I don't think it will damage their reputation because I think the British people have more sense than that. And I think the British press, for all their faults, I think they will also see this for what it is. As for Morgan naming them, mixed views on that. Maybe he shouldn't have done it, but there is an argument to be made that without doing it, the rumor mills will keep churning. So let me know your thoughts.